Namo Buddhaya, and welcome to the Buddha Dharma TV Saturday program. I am Lisa Chu. Today we will start with a Dharma talk, a Buddhist song, and a Jataka story. Today's Dharma talk is by Bhante Shavati Dhammikar from Australia. He took his lower ordination as a Theravada monk in India in 1976. He has since written over 35 books, many of which are available online at no cost. Bhante lived and taught in Sri Lanka and later Singapore, where he was a spiritual advisor to the Buddha Dhamma Mandala Society. Bhante's book titled Good Question, Good Answer is a modern Buddhist classic and has been translated into 38 languages. He has also written extensively on pilgrimage in Buddhism. Bhante Dhammikar has offered keen insights into the adaptation of Dharma into the West. After 45 years in Asia, he moved back to Australia in 2017, where he lives in semi-retirement and continues writing. Now, here is Venerable Bhante Shavati Dhammikar to give part 1 of his Dharma talk titled, How Do We Explain the Buddha's Miracles?
In the suttas, they come across claims in the suttas that the Buddha was able to read somebody's mind, or that after the Buddha gave a talk, he levitated from where he had been giving the talk to somewhere else. There is, of course, the famous incident mentioned in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, where it says that he and his companions decided to leave Pataligamma and head north. And of course, to do that, they had to cross the Ganges River. And it says that while other people were running up and down the bank of the river trying to find a boat or a raft, the Buddha disappeared from where he was and reappeared on the other side of the river. I find that an interesting story because I've very frequently read books or heard speeches by people who think that Buddhism and Christianity are very similar. And one of the similarities they think is that, well, Jesus walked on the water and the Buddha walked on the water. You see, they're similar in some ways. It's a pity they didn't read the sutta, because the sutta does not say that the Buddha walked on the water. It says he disappeared, that is, he became invisible, apparently, from this side of the river and became visible on the other side of the river. So there are differences. Anyway, so people read these things and it turns them off. They think they don't seem very credible. So I'd like to talk today about how we might go around about understanding these miracles, whether they are true or not, whether they are important or not, and so on. But when we're talking about miracles, I think we have to make a distinction between the word patihariya, it's a Pali word, and the word iddhi, which is also a Pali word. In Sanskrit, it's perhaps more well known as siddhi. So patihariya would seem to mean a miracle, and iddhi would seem to mean a psychic ability. And what's the difference between these two? Well, the word patihariya in Pali, like the word miracle in English, seems to indicate an occurrence or something that has happened which is either been produced by a god or a divine power, or by a person who has tapped into or has been influenced by a divine power. That seems to be, at least in English, that's how miracles are understood. Now, idis are somewhat different. The idea of an idi is not, it's got nothing to do with energy or an occurrence, energy coming from or an occurrence by a divine power or somebody filled with divine energy. An idi is a psychic ability. So within Buddhism, generally, it is believed that when the mind is purified and clear and focused and concentrated to a much higher level than normal, it unleashes or makes possible certain mental powers. There is a long belief in this in India, in all traditions, Jain, Buddhist, and Hindu. And in that sense, an idi is quite different from a miracle. A miracle is a divine or exceptional event, a supernatural event, whereas an idi, if there are such things, if an idi is a natural event. It is caused, it has natural causes. Now, are there such things? Well, I think one of the core things that the Buddha said, one of the most important things the Buddha said is the first line of the first verse in the Dhammapada. Mano pubangama dhamma, mano setta mano maya. Everything comes from the mind, is connected with the mind, is made by the mind. And over the last 100 years, research has tended to show that actually there is some truth in this. I think one of the most well-known and widely accepted evidence for this is what is called in medicine, it's called the placebo effect. Anybody who has studied medicine will know what this is. So any ordinary doctor will know what this is. So some people are sick and other people really aren't sick, but they think they are sick and they exhibit some of the symptoms of the sickness that they think they've got, strangely enough. So if somebody thinks they're sick, they actually sort of, in a sense, become sick. Now, an experienced doctor may very well sense that this is what the problem is. And so he or she, rather than giving the patient a medicine, they give them what they call a placebo. One doctor told me, actually, that at least a third of the patients who come to him aren't really sick. They've got problems at home. Their husband has left them, or worse still, their husband hasn't left them, and they're feeling bored, and the children have left home, and the husband's got financial problems and what have you. And this is making, one of the manifestations of this is worry and anxiety and what have you, and they feel sick. Now, it would be good for them to go to a clinician or a counselor or something like that, but the doctor doesn't have time to do that. So he will give them a placebo. And this doctor told me in his drawer, he keeps these placebos, tablets which have no medicine in them whatsoever. And he gives them to the patient and he says, look, these are very powerful. Don't take more than one at a time. But before you go to bed, take one of these and it'll knock you out real quick and you'll be able to sleep. And indeed, it does happen. This is not power coming from the doctor, and it's nothing coming from the medicine. Actually, it isn't medicine, it's a sugar tablet. It's coming from the person's mind. And a little later, I'll mention a really quite remarkable example of this idea that how you feel can actually make you sick. And to some extent, how you feel can make you well. And these would be an example, so fairly well-known example of the power of the mind. Now, such things may be far less dramatic than psychic abilities. Nonetheless, the claim in Buddhism is that there is a difference between miracles, which are supernatural, and indi powers, which are natural. Okay, so now let's have a look at it. Can we, another thing about miracles as opposed to idis is that the Buddha didn't have a very high opinion of such things. Actually, he didn't even have a very high opinion of idis either, or at least the display of idis. You know, in the Digha Nikaya, there is a famous incident where somebody comes to the Buddha. The Buddha was staying in Nalanda, and one of his devotees from Nalanda went to the Buddha and said, a lot of people in Nalanda have confidence in you. If you were to perform a miracle, they would have even more confidence in you. That in itself is a very interesting statement. Yes, you could give a talk of talking about profound aspects of Dhamma. You'll get 10 or 15 people. You can perform a miracle and you'll get thousands of them. For some reason or other, people are really fascinated, even entranced by the idea of miracles. I know nowadays in the United States, maybe in Sri Lanka too, there are Christian pastors who claim that they can miraculously heal various illnesses and afflictions and what have you. Usually their churches are so full that they can't accommodate all the people. People have a fascination with this sort of thing. So that's implied in this question that this man asked the Buddha. Lord, lots of people in Nalanda have confidence in you, but if you performed a miracle, even more people would. And you probably know the story. The Buddha refused to do that. And he did what he very often did. He took the word and gave it a different meaning. He used the word, commonly used word, but filled it with a very different meaning. So he said, well, I know of 3 types of miracles. There's one miracle that somebody does, and a skeptical person would say, that's not a miracle. He's just got some sort of magic charm, and he uses that charm to do it. And then he said somebody else might do a miracle, and somebody else a skeptic would say, oh, he did it through some trickery or something like that. And then the third type of miracle, the one that the Buddha, agrees with, is the miracle of Anusasani. And Anusasani means something like educational instruction. Sasana, Sasani, or Anusasani. And then he described what he said, that if you encourage somebody to think in certain ways, to make inquiries in certain ways, to weigh up things in certain ways, and to live in certain ways, meaning living ethically, he considered that to be a miracle. So here's an example where he's expressed his not disapproval, but he's expressed the idea that he doesn't really like traditionally understood as miracles. But one miracle that he did approve of was the miracle of teaching people to think and behave in certain ways. The other famous case is in some particular town, a very rich man had a sandalwood bowl. Now, if it was big enough to make a bowl out of it, it must have been a fairly big piece of sandalwood and probably very expensive. Anyway, this man put the bowl on the end of a piece of bamboo pole. He stuck it up in the middle of the village and he made a proclamation. Any Brahmin or Samana, monk or Swami who comes along, if they can levitate to the top of the bowl and take the bowl, they can have it. So one of the Buddha's monks, Pindola, I think his name was, he apparently had developed the ability to levitate due to his meditation. So that's a challenge too good to pass up. So he went to the town, he levitated to the top of the bowl, he took the bowl. The merchant was absolutely amazed, as I imagine all the other people in the village was, and it says that the merchant filled that bowl with all sorts of goodies, lavarias and cowans and kiribat or whatever. And it says that wherever Pindola went, excited, noisy crowds followed him. Why? Because we just said people love miracles. Even if they're not true, they want to believe in them. When the Buddha came to hear about this, he called Pindola to him, and we always think that the Buddha was this very gentle, polite, peaceful, never disagree with anybody. That's not true. He was a teacher of gods and humans. And in order to be an example, in order to be a good teacher, sometimes he had to lay down the law. And when monks or nuns misbehaved, as they sometimes did, he had no trouble pulling them into line. And if you read some of the things that he used to say, well, he'd say, "You're a vain and foolish man. How could you ever think that I would teach something like that?" When people misinterpreted it. But what he said to Pindola for performing this levitation trick, I think is the harshest thing he ever said. Does anybody know what he said to Pindola? He said to him, "You're like a whore. You're like a prostitute who lifts up her dress for a few coins." That's a pretty strong. He was making it clear to Pindola that you've cheapened the Dhamma. You've cheapened your ability. You're just like a prostitute who lifts her dress for a few miserable coins. So that gives you some idea what the Buddha thought of miracles, and even the public display of Indies. Okay. So now let's have a look at some of the miracles, or what many people think are miracles, mentioned in the suttas, that skeptical people have got doubts about. Now, I'm going to have a look at one sutta. It's a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, and it's called the Acharya Bhuta Dhamma Sutta. And it is an unusual sutta because it is the only sutta in the Tipitaka which recounts the Buddha's birth. It's the only one. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's quite long. But basically, it describes how the Buddha was in the heaven realm, how he descended into his mother's womb, and then how he was born, and the miraculous things that happened when he was born. And I'll look at several of these things. The first one is, I think everybody knows the story. It's a lovely story, or I think it's a lovely story, is that when the Buddha came out of his mother's womb, can anybody tell me what happened? There's something of a trick here. Anybody?
He walked 7 steps.
Yeah, that's right. He took 7 steps. Not bad for a baby, eh? I mean, Dr. Monori, you must have delivered many babies. How many of them got up and walked as soon as they were born?
None, but they have a thing called walking reflex if we hold them upright.
I'm not talking about walking reflex. I'm talking about walking. You must have, I mean, it must have happened all the time, hasn't it? You must have heard many cases of that. The little fellows walked out of the hospital and they had to go and bring them back again. It doesn't happen, does it? And what happened? What happened to each step he took?
A lotus bloomed.
The lotus. Well, I'm going to disappoint you. That's not in the sutta. That's been added by tradition. But I think it's a pity that that's not in the sutta, because I think that's rather lovely. That is, that to each step he took, a lotus emerged. And so that's partly from the sutta, partly from the traditional belief. And I believe, in fact, I think I remember seeing it one Vesak when I was in Kandy. On the lake in Kandy, in the middle of the lake, they had a very beautiful illuminated statue of the baby Buddha with 7 lotuses each one had a light in them so you could see them. Really quite lovely. The sort of thing that children love. Huh? So people can, and then he put his finger up in the air and said, I'm the greatest. This is my last life. So that's one of the stories. And I think that's the most elaborate and incredible miracle mentioned in the Tipitaka that I can think of. And I could well imagine people reading that and thinking, oh, goodness, Buddhism is just the same as all the other religions, these unbelievable stories, etc. But I've got a different idea about this story. But I'll deal with that in a minute. Another thing that happens, according to the sutta, is that the Buddha's mother did not lie or recline while she gave birth. She stood up, which I find interesting too. Anyway, and then there are several others. When it's in the sutta, it says, probably the most dramatic thing is that when the Buddha emerged from his mother's womb, a great light shot out into the universe. And it went as far as the sun and the moon rotate. And even in the dark space between the stars and the planets, even that dark, gloomy place, what we would call interstellar space, that light could be seen there. And it says that beings who lived in all that darkness, for the first time, they were able to see that there were other beings there. They hadn't seen them before because they lived in darkness. And when they saw that, these beings said, "Behold, I'm not the only one. Other beings are here." That sounds like it comes from one of these Marvel comics. So let's have a look at these stories. But before we have a look at these and some other miracles, what could we say about them? Well, the first thing we could say is, well, perhaps they're true. We don't know of any cases of babies walking. Okay. They certainly sound incredible, but they could be true. And indeed, over the centuries, many Buddhists have believed in them, and I suspect many still do. So the first thing is, these stories could be true. The second thing is, most people would say, they've been put in later. They come from a later period. In order to make the Buddha's life more colourful, in later periods, monks have added these stories to the Tripitaka. They could say that. But another thing they could say is, of course, they're completely false. They're not true in any sense. So there are possibilities. But there is a sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya which may give another answer to the question, how are we to understand these miracles? And in this sutta, the Buddha says he talks about two types of suttas. And if you can confuse one with another, you won't understand what I'm talking about. So he says, the first type of suttas are niyatta. And the second type of suttas the Buddha said he delivers is niyatta. Niyatta and nitatta. Now, these words can be translated slightly differently, but atta here means meaning. Niyatta could be translated as indirect meaning, and nitatta could be translated as direct meaning. So in the case of the first one, indirect meaning, this means something like, what I say is not to be taken literally. It's symbolic, or it's an allegory, it's allegorical. And nitatta is meant to be taken literally. What I say is exactly what I mean. Now, this is interesting. And I don't know that I've ever even heard a sermon on this particular sutta. So the Buddha is saying is, sometimes what I say is not to be taken literally. Sometimes what I say is meant to be taken literally. And if you confuse these two, you won't understand what I'm talking about. So let's look at this first one. Could it be that in the case of the Buddha taking these 7 steps, that if you were to say, well, it says in the sutta that the Buddha did this when he was a baby, therefore I believe it, then you may misunderstand what the Buddha meant. But if you understood it as a niyata sutta, as indirect or symbolic or allegorical, then you won't confuse what the Buddha said. So what could this possibly mean? Well, you take the 7 steps.
Okay.
Now, within the context of Buddhism, when I hear the number 7, the first thing I think of is the 7 factors of enlightenment. The 7 qualities or values that you have to integrate into yourself, practice, and make a part of your experience to become enlightened. And then when I think of a lotus, once again, within the Buddhist context, the lotus is supposed to be a symbol of transcendence. So you can go anywhere in Sri Lanka or India and you see water lilies or lotuses, and they grow best in mud, because that mud is full of rotting vegetation and it's very nutritious for the plant. And the lotus flowers, the leaves of the lotus are already above the surface of the water, but the bud grows and eventually it rises above the water and the mud and it opens. And to the ancient Indians, particularly the ancient Buddhists, this wasn't just a very beautiful flower. It reminded them of the whole idea of enlightenment. We are stuck in the mud of samsara, of greed, hatred, and delusion, but it is possible to rise above it and then open into something beautiful, that is the enlightened mind. So when I look at the story of the Buddha taking these 7 steps, as soon as I first heard that, and in the beginning I thought, oh God, this is just so silly. Who could believe this? But then when I thought about the 7 factors of enlightenment and the symbolism of the lotus, it occurred to me that this is trying to communicate an important truth, but not directly, using color and beauty and a sense of amazement. So in actual fact, if we understand this particular event as a niyata sutta, or part of a sutta with niyata element in it, perhaps it shouldn't be just dismissed and forgotten. It should be explored a little bit and thought about, what could this symbolize? Then take the other part of the story in the Acharya Buddha Dhamma Sutta. When the Bodhisattva emerged from his mother's womb, a great light shot into the universe, as far as the sun and moon, mighty though they are. Even that far this light went. And even in the gloomy darkness, the interstellar space, where even the light of our sun and moon cannot penetrate, even there that light penetrated, so that beings could see each other, so that beings became aware of each other. Well, you know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like to me a way of saying that because the Buddha came into the world and attained enlightenment, and then showed us how we can become enlightened, one of the things that can come from this is that we become more sensitive to our fellow human beings. Rather than being totally self-absorbed and selfish and concerned only with ourselves, the Buddha's teachings encourages us to become aware of others as well. Could it mean that the light of the Buddha's teachings allows us to and encourages us to think not just of ourselves, but to become aware of our fellow human beings? I think that is quite a credible way of interpreting this supposed miracle. Now, I just want to talk about one other thing from this sutta, the Acharya Bhuta Dhamma Sutta. As I mentioned, incidentally, there are some other things that everybody thinks is in the Tipitaka, which is not in the Tipitaka. So I just mentioned that the sutta mentions the Prince Siddhartha taking 7 steps, but it doesn't mention anything about lotuses. The other thing, it mentions that the Buddha's mother was sleeping, but it doesn't mention that she dreamed of a white elephant. It's not in the sutta. These are probably stories that evolved later, and in popular Buddhism, the two have been merged together. But the other thing that is mentioned in the sutta is that the Buddha's mother was standing when she gave birth. Now, when I was writing my recent book, this one here, Footprints in the Dust, okay, rather than just pick out everything that's mentioned about the Buddha, I thought about everything. And when I came to the Acharya Bhuta Dhamma Sutta, I read this sutta. The first thing I noticed is nothing about lotuses, nothing about dreaming of white elephants. And then I thought about the 7 factors of enlightenment. And then I thought about the light. And then I came to the Buddha's mother standing up and giving birth. Now, as far as I know, most women, when they give birth, they're lying prone. So then I looked up, I went to the website of the Royal Society of Midwives in London. And I went through that website and I was astonished to find that in actual fact, giving birth in Western cultures, giving birth lying down is a relatively new practice, no more than 200 or 300 years old. Prior to that, in Europe, women used to sit. In fact, they actually even had a chair. It's called a birthing chair. And there was a hole in the seat. The mother would sit in that and the baby would come out through the hole. Then I somehow or another, I can't remember now, but I made contact with a doctor in Sri Lanka. It wasn't you, Manori, was it? It was. And she informed me that in actual fact, that used to be a common practice in Sri Lanka until quite recently. And apparently some homes, probably of richer people, they had a special room. And in that room, I remember exactly what you told me because I was so amazed. There's no window, the door is shut, and there is a leather strap hanging from the roof. And the mother would go in there when the birth pains began, and she would hold on to the roof and give birth while standing. Then what I did was I went to Google Image and I put in standing while giving birth, ancient India. And straight away, at least 20 images from ancient temples in India, carvings and paintings showing women standing up while giving birth. Rather horrible pictures, actually. And so I discovered, well, this may not be symbolic. It is quite possible. In fact, it's very likely that the Buddha's mother, like other mothers at that time, was giving birth while standing. However, I do think that probably the story also has a symbolic meaning. the idea of the Bodhisattva, the pinnacle of humanity, that his mother would be lying down and that he would touch the ground, that probably, it would probably be in the ancient mind more comfortable if we thought that he never even touched the earth, that his mother was noble and dignified enough that she was standing rather than lying. So I think while it is absolutely credible that the Buddha's mother may have been standing when she gave birth, I think it's probably also symbolic in meaning.
Our next item is a song by a Malaysian Buddhist musical group called Wayfarers, who created a number of popular songs that are still sung today. They wrote songs in both English and Pali, covering mainly themes from the Buddha's teaching and personal reflections. Let us now listen to the Wayfarers.
Lost in sea of doubts, seeking my way in the dark, your light comes through. Teach me how to think and be master of my mind, your love so true. Lifting my head up when the world is messing up, you help me through.
Now it's time for Jataka Tales, which is a large collection of Buddhist morality stories whereby the Buddha recounts some of his past lives on his journey towards enlightenment.
คุระปุตตะชาดก ชาดกว่าด้วยการทำตนให้ไร้ประโยชน์ในสมัยพุทธกาลเมื่อครั้งที่พระบรมศาสดาสัมมาสัมพุทธเจ้าทรงประทับอยู่ณพระเชตวันมหาวิหารทรงปรารภภิกษุผู้ถูกภรรยาเก่าโลมเล้าแล้วทรงตรัสซักถามภิกษุนั้นจริงหรือภิกษุได้ทราบว่าเธอกระสันอยากสึก
จริงพระเจ้าค่ะ
เธอกระสันอยากสึกเพราะเหตุอะไร
เพราะภรรยาเก่าพระเจ้าค่ะ
ดูก่อนภิกษุหญิงนี้ทำสิ่งที่ไม่เป็นประโยชน์แก่เธอไม่เฉพาะในบัดนี้เท่านั้นแม้ในการก่อนเธอกำลังจะกระโดดเข้าไฟตายเพราะอาศัยหญิงนี้แต่อาศัยบัณฑิตจึงได้ชีวิตไว้พระศาสดาตรัสดังนี้แล้วจึงทรงนำเอาเรื่องในอดีตมาสาธกในอดีตการพระเจ้าเสนกะครองราชสมบัติอยู่ในนครพาราณสีครั้งนั้นพระเจ้าเสนกะเสด็จประพาสเมืองมีนาคราชตนหนึ่งกำลังเที่ยวจับเหยื่อบนบกกินอยู่เด็กชาวบ้านกลุ่มหนึ่งผ่านมาเห็นก็เข้าใจว่าเป็นงูจึงช่วยกันเอาไม้ทุบตี
นี่แน่เจ้างูตีให้ตายตีให้ตายพวกเจ้ามาช่วยข้าตีมันหน่อยสิ
เจ้างูนี่ตัวใหญ่นักคงลักขโมยกินไก่ชาวบ้านมาไม่น้อยนี่แน่ต้องโดนแบบนี้
พระราชาเสด็จไปถึงที่นั่นพอดีเห็นเด็กกำลังทำร้ายงูก็เกิดความสงสารจึงรับสั่งห้ามไว้และให้ปล่อยมันไป
เจ้าหนูพวกเจ้ากำลังทำอะไรกันอยู่นะ
พวกข้ากำลังตีงูนี่อยู่พระเจ้าค่ะ
พวกเจ้าอย่าได้รังแกสัตว์เช่นนี้จงปล่อยมันไปเสียเถิด
ฝ่ายนาคราชเมื่อรอดชีวิตก็กลับไปยังนาคพิภพของตน
พระราชาองค์นี้เป็นผู้มีเมตตาสมควรที่เราต้องตอบแทนคุณ
ครั้นเวลาเที่ยงคืนนาคราชได้จำแรงตนเข้าเฝ้าพระราชาถึงที่บรรทมและได้มอบแก้วแหวนเงินทองให้พระเจ้าเสนกะพร้อมผูกมิตรภาพเป็นพระสหายกัน
ข้าพระองค์นำแก้วแหวนเงินทองเหล่านี้มาเพื่อตอบแทนที่ทรงช่วยชีวิตข้าพระองค์ไว้
นับแต่นั้นนาคราชก็มาเยี่ยมเยียนพระเจ้าเสนกะผู้เป็นสหายในยามดึกทุกคืนและได้มอบหมายให้นาคมารวิกานางหนึ่งผู้ไม่อิ่มในกามคุณมาประจำอยู่ข้างพระเจ้าเสนกะเพื่อคอยปกป้องดูแลพระองค์พร้อมกับมอบมนต์บทหนึ่งให้พระราชาไว้ใช้ในคราวไม่เห็นนางนาคตนนั้น
นาคมารวิกานางนี้ข้าพระองค์มอบหมายให้คอยดูแลปกป้องพระองค์หากไม่เห็นนางเมื่อใดท่านจงร่ายมนต์นี้
อยู่มาวันหนึ่งพระเจ้าเสนกะเสด็จประพาสสวนหลวงพร้อมด้วยบริวารขณะลงเล่นน้ำในสระอยู่นั้นนางนาคเห็นงูน้ำตัวหนึ่งแล้วเกิดความใคร่จึงแปลงร่างเป็นงูเสพสมกันอยู่
ทำอะไรอยู่จ๊ะพ่องูรูปหล่อมานี่สิข้ามีอะไรจะให้เจ้าดู
ฝ่ายพระเจ้าเสนกะเมื่อไม่ทรงเห็นนางนาคจึงร่ายมนต์ที่พญานาคราชสอนไว้
นางนาคมานวิกาเจ้าอยู่ไหนสงสัยเราต้องร่ายมนต์ให้นางปรากฏตัวซะแล้ว
เมื่อพระราชาร่ายมนต์จบนางนาคก็กลายร่างเป็นมนุษย์กำลังทำอนาจารอยู่ทำให้พระเจ้าเสนกะส่งกริ้วใช้ซีกไม้ไผ่ตีนาง
นางนาคผู้ไม่รู้จักอิ่มในกาม ไม่รู้จักอดกลั้นใจเลย เจ้าต้องได้รับโทษแน่ๆนี่นะ
โอ้ยเจ็บนะหากท่านทำร้ายข้าเช่นนี้ข้าก็จะไม่ขออยู่ดูแลท่านอีก
นางนาคออกจากพระราชอุทยานกลับไปยังนาคพิภพด้วยความโกรธที่พระราชาลงโทษตนเมื่อมาถึงนาคพิภพก็เข้าเฝ้าพญานาคราช
เกิดเรื่องอะไรเจ้าถึงมาที่นี่ได้
พระเจ้าเสนกะพระสหายของพระองค์เคี่ยนตีหม่อมฉันจนต้องหนีมาดูรอยแผลพวกนี้สิเพคะ
น้อยพระเจ้าเสนกะทำร้ายคนของเราได้เสียแรงที่เราเป็นสหายกันมา
พญานาคราชไม่ทราบความจริงที่เกิดขึ้นเพียงได้เห็นแผลของนางนาคก็โกรธเรียกทหารนาค4 ตนมาแล้วสั่งให้ไปทำลายพระที่นั่งบรรทมของพระเจ้าเสนกะ
พวกเจ้าทั้งสี่จงไปพ่นพิษทำลายพระที่นั่งบรรทมของพระเจ้าเสนกะเสียให้สิ้น
ทหารนาคทั้ง4มาถึงห้องบรรทมหมายจะทำลายพระที่นั่งบรรทมเสียก็ได้ยินพระราชาตรัสเล่าให้พระราชเทวีฟังถึงเรื่องที่นางนาคมารวิกากลับไปยังนาคภพทหารนาคทั้งหลายได้ฟังดังนั้นก็กลับไปรายงานพญานาคราช
ที่แท้ก็เป็นเช่นนี้เองเพราะเราฟังความข้างเดียวจนเกือบทำร้ายสหายเสียแล้ว
พญานาคราชรู้สึกผิดต่อพระเจ้าเสนกะจึงเสด็จมายังพระที่นั่งบรรทมของพระสหายเพื่อขอขมาแล้วได้ถวายมนต์ชื่อว่าสัพพรุตตชนะซึ่งเป็นมนต์รู้เสียงร้องของสัตว์ทุกชนิดแล้วจึงทูลห้ามไม่ให้พระเจ้าเสนกะมอบมนต์นี้แก่ผู้อื่นไม่เช่นนั้นจะต้องทรงกระโดดเข้ากองไฟสวรรคต
มนต์สัพพรุตชนนะนี้สำคัญยิ่งนักทรงอย่ามอบให้ผู้ใดไม่เช่นนั้นท่านต้องสละชีวิตด้วยการกระโดดเข้ากองไฟ
ข้าขอรับคำท่าน
ตั้งแต่นั้นมาพระเจ้าเสนกะก็ทรงรู้เสียงสัตว์ต่างๆวันหนึ่งขณะที่พระองค์ประทับนั่งที่ท้องพระโรงเสวยของเคี้ยวจิ้มน้ำผึ้งน้ำอ้อยอยู่นั้นน้ำผึ้งน้ำอ้อยหยดหนึ่งและขนมชิ้นหนึ่งตกลงที่พื้นมดแดงตัวหนึ่งเห็นหยดน้ำผึ้งและขนมนั้นก็เรียกเพื่อนให้มากิน
พวกเราถาดน้ำผึ้งแตกหม้อน้ำอ้อยหม้อขนมคว่ำแล้วที่ท้องพระโรงรีบมากินกันเถิด
ลาบปากรอบเย็น มื้อนี้ได้ดินเนอร์อาหารพระราชาว้าวอร่อยอูมามิ
พระราชาทรงสดับเสียงร้องบอกของมดแดงแล้วก็ทรงพระสวนพระราชเทวีที่ประทับอยู่ใกล้ๆเห็นดังนั้นก็เกิดความสงสัยแต่ก็ไม่ได้ทูลถามเมื่อพระราชาเสวยของเคี้ยวแล้วทรงสงสนานและประทับนั่งบนพระราชบัลลังก์ทรงได้ยินแมลงวันตัวผู้คุยกับแมลงวันตัวเมีย
ที่รักบรรยากาศแบบนี้เรามาหาอะไรทำสนุกกันดีกว่านะ
คอยก่อนนะจ๊ะพี่จ๋าเดี๋ยวพระราชาทรงรูปไล้ผงหอมแล้วน้องจะเอาตัวไปคลุกผงหอมที่พระราชาทำร่วงไว้น้องจะได้ตัวหอมๆยังไงล่ะจ๊ะพี่
ต่อมาเมื่อพระราชาทรงเสวยพระกยาหารเย็นอีกอาหารก้อนหนึ่งหล่นที่พื้นมดแดงทั้งหลายก็ร้องบอกกันให้มากินอาหารนั้น
พวกเราหม้ออาหารของพระราชาแตกแล้วรีบมากินกันเถอะเย้
ว้าวลาบปากรอบเย็น อร่อยแงบ
พระเทวีกลั้นความสงสัยเอาไว้ถึง3 คราจนเมื่อเวลาเสด็จขึ้นแท่นพระบรรทมกับพระราชาพระนางจึงได้ทูลถาม
วันนี้หม่อมฉันเห็นพระองค์หัวเราะถึง3 ครั้งพระองค์ทรงหัวเราะอะไรเพคะ
ไม่มีอะไรหรอกเจ้านอนซะเถิด
พระเทวีส่งรบเร้าจนพระราชาใจอ่อนจึงบอกเรื่องที่ทรงรู้มนต์ที่ทำให้รู้เสียงสัตว์นั้น พระนางจึงขอให้พระองค์ประทานมนต์นั้นให้
น้องหญิงหากพี่บอกมนต์นั้นแก่เจ้าพี่จะต้องตายนะ
หากพระองค์รักหม่อมฉันจริงขอจงสละเพื่อหม่อมฉันเถิด
ด้วยพระตกอยู่ในอำนาจของสตรีพระราชาทรงตัดสินพระทัยว่าจะมอบมนต์สัพพรุตชนนะแก่พระราชเทวีแม้จะต้องเข้ากองไฟก็ตามคิดได้ดังนี้แล้วจึงเสด็จเข้าไปยังพระราชอุทยานด้วยราชรถ
น้องหญิงเอ๋ยเพราะพี่รักเจ้าแม้ต้องสละชีพพี่ก็ยอม
ขณะนั้นท้าวสักกะทรงตรวจดูสัตว์โลกอยู่ทรงเห็นเหตุการณ์นี้จึงทรงดำริว่าจะต้องเตือนสติพระเจ้าเสนกะพระราชาผู้โง่เขลาเพียงเพื่อสตรีแล้วถึงกับยอมตายเชียวหรือเนี่ยข้าต้องเตือนสติเจ้าซะหน่อยแล้วท้าวสักกะพานางสุชาดามายังสวนหลวงแล้วจำแรงตนเป็นแพะสองผัวเมียยืนอยู่ข้างทางที่พระราชาเสด็จผ่านแพะตัวผู้กำลังทำท่าทางเสพสมกับแพะตัวเมียอยู่ม้าเทียมรถพระราชาจึงพูดกับแพะนั้น
เจ้าแพะโง่ไม่รู้จักอะไรควรทำในที่แจ้งอะไรควรทำในที่ลับเลยนะ
เจ้านั่นแหละโง่ถูกเชือดลัดคอไว้เวลาเขาปล่อยเจ้าก็ไม่หนีไปแต่ข้าว่าพระเจ้าเสนกะเจ้านายเจ้าน่ะโง่กว่าแกซะอีก
เจ้าว่าข้าโง่ข้าก็รู้แต่พระเจ้าเสนกะโง่ยังไง
ไม่โง่ได้ยังไงยอมตายเพื่อสวดมนต์ให้พระเทวีสุดท้ายตัวเองก็จะตายไม่มีภรรยาข้าถึงว่าโง่ยังไงล่ะ
พระเจ้าเสนกะได้สดับคำที่แพะและม้าสนทนากันจึงตรัสถามแพะว่าควรทำเช่นไร
เจ้าแพะเอ๋ยถ้าเช่นนั้นเจ้าจงบอกมาว่าข้าควรทำอย่างไรกัน
มหาราชไม่มีสิ่งอื่นเป็นที่รักเท่าชีวิตของตนท่านไม่ควรให้ตนพินาศไม่ควรละทิ้งยศศักดิ์เพราะคนรักอย่างเดียว
แพะนั้นพูดกับพระเจ้าเสนกะแล้วก็แสดงตนเป็นท้าวสักกะให้พระราชาทราบ
ข้าพระองค์ได้ตอบตกลงไปแล้วจะทำอย่างไรดี
มหาราชพวกท่านทั้งสองจะไม่เป็นอะไรถ้าพระองค์บอกว่าหากจะเรียนมนต์ต้องถูกเฆี่ยนตีเป็นข้ายกครูนางก็จะไม่เรียนเองเมื่อพระราชาเสด็จกลับเมืองแล้วจึงรับสั่งให้พระเทวีเข้าเฝ้าแล้วตรัสบอกตามที่ท้าวสักกะบอก
น้องหญิงหากเจ้าจะเรียนมนต์นี้เจ้าต้องเสียค่ายกครูด้วยการถูกเฆี่ยน100 ครั้งเจ้าจะยอมหรือไม่
เพื่อมนต์วิเศษนี้น้องยอมให้เฆี่ยนเพคะ
เมื่อพระเทวีก็รับคำยินดีให้เฆี่ยนพระองค์จึงรับสั่งให้ทหารเพชฌฆาตเฆี่ยนหลังพระเทวีด้วยหวาย100 ครั้งพระเทวีพอถูกเฆี่ยนไปเพียง3 ทีเท่านั้นก็ทนไม่ไหวไม่ต้องการเรียนมนต์อีกนับแต่นั้นมาพระเทวีก็ไม่กล้าเอ่ยปากขอเรียนมนต์อีกเลย
โอ๊ยโอ๊ยโอ๊ยไม่ไหวแล้วเจ็บเหลือเกินน้องไม่เรียนมนต์นั่นแล้วเพคะ
พระศาสดาทรงนำพระธรรมเทศนานี้มาแล้วทรงประกาศสัจธรรมทั้งหลายในที่สุดแห่งสัจธรรมภิกษุผู้กระสันอยากศึกได้ดำรงอยู่ในโสดาปัตติผลแล้วทรงประชุมชาดกพระราชาในครั้งนั้นได้เป็นภิกษุผู้กระสันอยากศึกในบัดนี้พระราชเทวีเป็นภรรยาเก่าของภิกษุนั้นม้าเป็นพระสารีบุตรส่วนท้าวสักกะเทวราชเป็นเราตถาคตฉะนี้แล
concludes today's program. If you have any questions about the contents of our broadcast, please feel free to reach out to us at info@buddhadharmatv.com. Our dedicated team remains committed to sharing the profound teachings of the Buddha, helping you walk the path of wisdom and enlightenment. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow at the same time. Namo Buddhaya.